justice. Ring the bell down there. Ring the bell for culture. Ring the bell down there. Ring the bell for freedom. Ring the bell down there. I said to ring up the bell for the rhapsody drum. Ring the bell down there. Ring it all over. Ring it all over. Ring it all over. Ring it all over. Hey. Come on, brother leader. It's high time that you summon up the power. This time, boss it in the bell. Well, look, I have a story to tell. Well, it's a long time now we fighting for freedom. Victory bound to come. Assemble the people, recite of the mission. Let we rock the rap so we done. Whoa, ring the bell, ring the bell. Ring the bell down there. Ring the bell, ring the bell. Ring the bell down there. Ring the bell for justice. Ring the bell down there. Ring the bell for culture. Ring the bell down there. Ring the bell for freedom. Ring the bell down there. I said to ring up the bell for the rap so we drum. Ring the bell down there. Ring it all over. Ring it all over. Ring it all over. Ring it all over. Hey. So listen well, I come to deliver this word. Let the voice of the dumb press be heard over the world. Let the people's story be told. Well, it's a long time now we come out for action. Glory days come down. I come with my bell just to second the motion. Rock the rap so we dumb. Whoa, I ring the bell, ring the bell. Ring the bell down there. Ring the bell, ring the bell. Ring the bell down there. Ring the bell for justice. Ring the bell down there. Ring the bell for culture. Ring the bell down there. Ring the bell for freedom. Ring the bell down there. I seem to ring up the bell for the rap so we dumb. Ring the bell down there. Ring it all over. Ring it all over. Ring it all over. Ring it all over. Hey. Bring it in the House of Parliament. Bring it in the seat of government. And let it hear. Let it hear. Bring it in the House of Congress. Bring it in the Buckingham Palace. In the Kremlin and Washington. Ring it in the Vatican too, Lord. Oh, I ring the bell, ring the bell. Ring the bell down there. Ring the bell, ring the bell. Ring the bell down there. Ring the bell for justice. Ring the bell down there. Ring the bell for culture. Ring the bell down there. Ring the bell for freedom. Ring the bell down there. I said to ring up the bell for the rap so we dumb. Ring the bell down there. Ring it all over. Ring it all over. Ring it all over. Ring it all over. Hey.
You're on, OG.
Good evening, viewers. Welcome to Kams TV's June 27th, 2022 edition of WPA Dayclean Groundings, Dayclean program. I am sitting in tonight in space of your usual host, Kadaki Amsterdam. And I want to say that he is with us doing some lighter work in the technical area. Viewers on this program will know that Kams TV and Politics 101 by Dr. David Hinds has been tirelessly working in the last few days to ensure that our brother and comrade who was killed by the police in Golden Grove area got a proper send-off. And they're tired. Of course, they succeed in bringing out thousands of citizens from the East Coast and around the country to make a very profound statement. So we know that they're tired. So Kodaki earned, okay, a day off, but he's with us behind the scene. We have to apologize for being late because in the village of Buxton, where Kams TV is being hosted, or the home of Kams TV, is experiencing blackout, so you have to resort to generator. So we have lost some time. So we will move very speedily into the business. This program tonight is part of the activities that were organized by the Working People's Alliance to commemorate the 42nd departure of our beloved comrade, Walter Rodney, who was assassinated on June 13, 1980. Usually, in this month of June, the party, Rodney, relatives, friends, comrades, associates, politically and in academia, make a special effort to remember the life and work of Walter Rodney. And tonight, the WPA is bringing together, you will remember on June 13th, we held a symposium in Georgetown at the library, and we addressed a number of issues. Tonight, we're bringing together comrades who have been living abroad for many years. All of them have been close associates to Walter to share their experiences, their various perspectives, whatever they wish to say as they reflect on 42 years of, since his passing. So the program tonight will be very conversational. It will not be a strict question and answer. And as host, I will, intervene, where I think necessary. But my panelists are free to feed off for each other and to discuss Walter from whatever perspective they wish to do. We hope that out of this kind of experience, our viewers will have a good insight into the work, the life, and the struggle of Walter Rodney. Tonight, our panelists are Nigel Westmus, Dennis Canterbury, Rohit Kanai, and of course, Keith Blanche, which is no stranger to WPA Walter Rodney, WPA Dayclean Groundings, because he has been a regular person on the program. So what I will just do, ask each of the panelists just to quickly introduce themselves, and then we will go into the discussion proper. Anybody could volunteer. I don't want to call names. Anybody who want to kick off? Like I got to call name. Nigel.
Okay, hi, I'm Nigel Rasmus. I currently live abroad, as Takuma mentioned. I teach at the University, Hamilton College, an upstate university, and I teach in Africana Studies. I was, as Takuma mentioned, a former brief associate of Walter because I was pretty young and I only had very short contact with him, although very fundamental, until before he was assassinated. So, but anyway, I'm broad, and I am, I also do occasional work on Guyanese history and publish them in the Stablic News. So, thank you.
Dennis?
Thank you, Brother Ogun, and good evening. My name is Dennis Canterbury, and I'm currently residing abroad in Connecticut, where I'm teaching at the Eastern Connecticut State University. And I've been acquainted with Walter since I was a student at the University of Guyana. And my work basically is on the Caribbean and Guyana, and I'm looking forward to a very healthy discussion.
Rohit?
Good evening. My name is Rohit Kanhai. I'm currently living abroad. I knew Walter during the 1979-80 period, and his death has had a very profound effect upon me. I was involved in the Commission of Inquiry in 2014 and still doing some research on it. Thank you.
Okay, Keith, you, even though you don't need much introduction, but just with the convention.
Okay, I am Keith Branch. I reside in Pennsylvania in the United States, retired human resources person. I chair sorry, I wasn't the chairperson. I acted as the chairperson, but I was the press secretary for the Working People's Alliance Overseas Associates for a number of years. And many of the persons appearing on the show today and others who could not appear because of a multitude of varied reasons are still not as active in the organization, but are in touch with the organization and indirectly with the Working People's Alliance. They too had a relationship with Brother Rodney, and they would have liked to be here, some of them, to talk about it, to talk about what their experiences were, what they learned, and how it impacted and influenced their lives since. But I know that the five of us, including yourself, would be able to cover a lot of what they have experienced and what they are experiencing as disciples of the late Walter Rodney.
Okay, thank you, comrades. Okay, as I said, persons will pursue the issue from wherever they wish. Okay, now this is a moment for persons to begin to make their profound reflections, and I'm hopeful that each and every person may probably have 3 or 4 opportunities to do that. So we're doing it in pieces. So I want to ask, okay, I don't like to, I really don't want to be calling out persons. I was hoping that people will volunteer, but people don't like to volunteer. One thing I must say and ask all of you, your voice coming over to me low. So I don't know because I got a loud mouth, but if you could raise your voice, I think it would also be helpful. Okay, Dennis, let me start with you. Take the first shot. tell our viewers whatever you want in this first round to say about Walter.
Thank you very much, Ogun. Are you hearing me clearly?
Yes, I'm hearing you clearly.
I'm using my voice so that you could hear better. I typically just put together a page of notes, and I entitled the page Walter Rodney on Comparative Politics and Self-Reliance. I would like to reflect on those two aspects of my personal association with Walter. And I think that these two aspects are very important for political activists in Guyana and elsewhere. They might be able to draw some lessons from them in terms of how they might conduct their own affairs as political activists in Guyana and in other places. Now, the first has to do with Walter's approach to comparative politics. And the second concerns the acquiring of skills for self-reliance. Now, the first reflection then is to share a story about Walter and comparative politics. Now, many years ago, while I was an undergrad at the University of Guyana, I did a course in comparative politics. And we had a professor from Uganda, and his name was Borongo, Professor Borongo. And apparently, Ibn Abin had some problems with him, so the guys recruited him at the University of Guyana. So Walter asked me what courses I was doing. I said I was doing comparative politics. And he asked what books I was using. So I told him we were using Harry Eckstein's and David Apter's Comparative Politics, a Reader. Now, in this book, Comparative Politics, a Reader, it sort of had looking at comparative politics in terms of democracy, like comparative political systems, democracy versus authoritarianism, or what they would say totalitarianism. That was the approach in that book, with a series of articles or chapters. But instead, Walter said, look, read these two books. And he gave me two books to read. I'll never forget. Give me Class Struggles in Tanzania by Isa Shivji. And then he gave me Mau Mau Detainees by Josiah Kariuki, who became subsequently worked with the Jomo Kenyatta regime in different capacities. So, but when we looked at those two books, one of the things I got from that story, comparing the two things, the two approaches to comparative politics, was that domestically, on the ground, what he was doing is looking at the different class interests and political platforms that they represent. So if we're doing politics in Guyana or in the Caribbean or in Africa or anywhere, for people like us, I think it's important to understand what are the different interests on the ground, what platforms they have, what are the issues they represent. And then is when you're able to determine comparatively, it's comparative politics, which interests you might collaborate with, all right, and which interests you wouldn't. And so this brings us to the very present period in the WPA, where I think this is something that they have to do. I'm sure that they're already doing it. Looking on the ground to see what are the different interests and how they might be able to work with or not work with on the ground in terms of the politics there, right? So that is one thing. The other thing was, I'm convinced that Walter was a carpenter. And I actually, and this is a question of self-reliance. I know this because when he was going to do those seminars, Nigel, I think you attended some of those seminars at his house, at the Bottom House, when he wrote the book, right? we built the benches that you sat on, right? He had a way of getting wood, goes to the shop, to the carpentry, to the lumber yard or wherever they were selling wood, buy the wood, put it in the back of his car, bring it to the house, measure, saw, and nail, and I'm holding. And he built all those benches like that. So I'm saying to myself, that's an important lesson for young political activists, because you also have to learn how to be self-reliant, to do things for yourself. And this is not saying that you have to be completely self-reliant, but being self-reliant is a very important part of political activism, I think, especially when you're in a situation such as we are in Guyana. Let me stop there and allow Nigel perhaps to go.
No, I won't take Nigel now. I will ask Rohit to come in, and after Rohit, okay, I will get Nigel to follow Rohit. Are you hearing me, Rohit?
Yes, I am. The most endearing thing for me and Walter was...
Raise your voice, raise your voice, raise your voice.
The most endearing experience I had of Walter was one day I drove up to the WPA Center in Tiger Bay, as we called it. And he was on the sidewalk. When I came out the car, he put his arms around my shoulder and told me that, you know, I was very important in the struggle. That moment, when I look back, I think it was a very important moment. And I was reminded of that about 5 years ago when, on one of Walter's anniversary, I went to Atlanta. And the brothers there were virtually, they were so enthusiastic to meet people who actually knew Walter. They knew of him as an abstraction, a man of ideas, but the man of flesh and blood, they never had that experience. And they just wanted to know who this person was. So that for me is a touching moment in every sense of the word. But when I look back at Walter, I think the most important thing for me is I became part of the WPA, part of the political struggle, and part of a multiracial struggle. Prior to being in the WPA, I was a member of the PPP. And it just struck me that the party was Indian historically and didn't seem to have any meaningful contact with members of the Black community. And in the WPA, I was able to, for the first time, meaningfully come into Black people and see the human side of them, not just the other. We had a common struggle against a dictatorship. And it's an experience that, had I not had that experience, I don't think I could be the person who dedicated his existence from the time of Walter's death to the present. I'll stop at that.
Okay, Nigel, you could come in and then followed by Keith.
Okay, thank you, Takuma, and thank you, Dennis and Rohit. You've both indicated angles in which I could segue myself. I agree with both of you in terms of personal impact. In Dennis's case, I do remember the Bottom House meeting classroom in South Ramveld, but I didn't know what Dennis reported about Walter actually building the tables. I do remember the tables. I was a youngster floundering about. As you probably know, my father was in the secretary to Dr. Jagan, and I was, albeit an independent spirit, so to speak, from the outset. I was never forced into the party, but I was wandering in the streets one day, and Bonita Harris invited me to come to a class. And when I turned up at the class, of course, it was Walter's class. This is 1977. I still have the syllabus, one sheet syllabus of it. If I could share it, I would share it, but I wouldn't do that now. So as Dennis says, I picked up from Dennis, I did attend those classes about 2 or 3 or 5 days or so, I can't remember exactly, but it was very profound. He talked about Guyanese history and he talked about African history, and you melded them nicely together. I left there very transformed, so to speak, the way Rohit is mentioning. The second experience I had was when I was chased with Dr. Rupnarayan along the West Bank to a place called Lagrange after thugs had broken up the meeting, which Walter was scheduled to speak. As you probably know, I ran away. Myself and Rupert had to spring out of the car because thugs were about 20 yards behind us. I ran into Canefield and hid the night, and Rupert was rescued by the residents in Lagrange. But during the night, I stayed in the Canefield, and then I made my way back to town, walked over the bridge in the morning, early morning. And when I arrived at the office, just like Rohit said about that patting on the back, the first person I saw at the center was Walter. He was behind the desk, and his face looked very relieved. He was almost like, like of somebody who was in a panic, and then they saw somebody who they thought was dead. And that I remember instantly. And then right away, he took a car and went with others. I think Ogun was probably in that group, went across the river to look for Rupert because we thought he was also missing. The third and final experience, which is very profound to me, and which, of course, Dennis' point about carpentry comes to light, is that one day I was asked to join a car. This is Olga Bone's car. It was driven by a Portuguese woman, and I didn't know it at the time, but I was part of an operation. And the operation was that I would sit in the front seat as a youngster who is a son of that woman who I didn't know at the time. And then somebody at one point in Sobrianville, somebody stepped into the back of the car. I reached out of Georgetown. The person who was behind me in carpentry gear with a saw, with a hammer, was Walter Rodney. We passed the roadblocks because the psychology was that if you shine a torchlight into the car and you see a Portuguese woman, a fairly good-looking car, and apparently somebody in the front seat who looks at the sun, and a sleeping carpenter, that they would let it pass. This happened on 2 occasions. The car reached into Linden, and Walter and myself went to meet to the comrades there. And then he said, I remember him saying to the people, steal yourselves. You have a long way ahead, steal yourselves. So those are some of the 3 moments which, again, even though I have sometimes poor memory, those memories, like Rohit and Dennis, stuck in my mind forever. I will never forget them. Thank you.
Okay, Keith.
Yes,
Keith, are you hearing me?
Yes, I'm hearing you clearly. I just took a minute to get myself off mute. Unlike the other brothers, I didn't work directly with Brother Walter. During that time, I worked with the Guyana Council of Churches in Kwamina Street. At that time, it was called Murray Street, which was like about 2 blocks from the WPA Center in Tiger Bay. I would frequent the Tiger Bay office to talk to Brother Yussi, because he was my main contact over there. And in going there, I would meet Walter. But also, and I had mentioned this before, because of my role as a youth director with the ecumenical movement, I traveled the Caribbean extensively during that time. And whenever I travel, I will meet people who knew Walter. especially in like Jamaica. And they always had books. I don't know, maybe they thought he didn't read sufficiently, but they always had books to send to him. And they would say, well, you know, Keith, do you know Walter? And I would say, yes. And they'd say, well, you know, can you take these books for him? And I'll bring the books, you know, come across to the center and give them to him. And he would always, and I always remember, he would always talk about my reason for visiting, you know, what success I thought that the program achieved, what I think that the program can build on to unite Caribbean people and move them away from a post-colonial status. Of course, a lot of that was beyond me sometimes, but he made it very simple. But most of all, though, he always inquired about the sender of those books. You know, how were they doing? You know, do I know their families? How were the families doing? Somebody was not feeling well when he last heard from them. Are they feeling better? You know, and how are they coping? I know that that some of the sisters in Jamaica at that time were under real duress from the GLP government. And well, the GLP was in opposition at that time, but they were very strong. And you know, he would always inquire about, you know, what were they doing, how were they coping, did they look as if they were comfortable in terms of their psyche, you know, whether they were planning to stay in Jamaica or to leave, because, you know, the extensive pressure they were under and the probability of the PNP losing the election was real. And he was right. The PNP did lose that election the next year or 2 years after that. But yes, I was very moved about his concern for, you know, he didn't just take the books and say, oh, thanks, I was looking for these for a long time. Or thanks, I need these as references from, you know, some document I'm writing. You know, that was, I guess, was important in his mind. But what was foremost was the well-being of those people who were reaching out to him with the books and pamphlets. And that is whenever I remember Walter, I mean, I remember him for that. And you know, it was like really often that I would be chucking books in his hand and he'd be saying thanks.
Okay, thank you. The second round, Rose, would you I'll give you a chance to lead off the second round. Have you lost Rose? Is he still with us?
I'm here.
Okay.
Okay. At the time in Guyana, during the 78 period, when I was a member of the PPP, I had a particular experience at a group meeting. Cyril Belgrave was the representative there. And we were discussing the uprising in the country. And he made a remark that let the Black people fight among themselves. And he was referring to the WPA, PNC, or the government struggle. And I had a strong emotional reaction to that. At the time, I had a book in my hand and I flung it down to the ground. It reflected how emotional I was, because I thought the most common sense thing in the political struggle at that point in time was for some form of unity between the WPA and the PPP, to move a dictatorship out of the country. And it made no sense, absolutely, in my thinking. After that, I had my business in Rob Street, and another incident took place. I was attending UG, and I met Josh, Kenneth Prasad, and even Rupert.
Josh, by Josh, you mean Josh Ramsamy?
Kenneth Prasad, Rupert Ruparine, Omawale. And one day, all four of them, five of them were in my car. And I reflected what a strange sight this was. A PPP person and a group of WPA persons in my car. Then, sometime later, Dr. Jagan called me at Freedom House and said, "Comrade, these resources are PPP resources. We can't be sharing it around." And he was referring to my car. And I left that encounter with him, and I wouldn't say the words I was thinking then. But I had developed a very close relationship with the WPA, and the meetings at Border Mall were memorable. Walter's presentation were very moving. Walter was probably the best orator when it came to delivering the truth. And piece by piece, I became entrenched in WPA politics. But I never joined the WPA, even though I worked closely with them. I had a sense of shame that the WPA was the leading resistance against the government, and I felt I was just jumping on the bandwagon. It was when Walter was killed, then I felt I just couldn't be on the sideline, and I joined the WPA after Walter's death, even though I was working with them before. Walter's death had that profound effect upon me. And the group of people called the WPA at that time, their dedication to the struggle has sustained me over the years. And even though I will concede there's a split between those who felt we should not have joined with the PNC because of the killing of Walter. For them, that's a sin that cannot be forgiven. And those who felt that the national interests had to take precedence over that crime. It is the dedication of both groups of people that has kept me going up to this day. I'll close here.
Nigel?
Thank you, Takuma. Thank you, Rohit, for your comments. As I indicated, just at the period when I joined the party, it was around 77, 78, largely through the instrumentation of Benita Harris. But I quickly became active in the organization at the level of center coordinator along with Mobutu Kamara. And again, we saw the constant, as Dennis and others mentioned, the constant ebbing and flowing of people in and out of the office. Oh, sorry, Keith mentioned he went to the office to saw Walter. And I saw that on a daily basis, the movement of people in and out of the office. And the energy that Walter stimulated himself. Now, he was not the only quote unquote stimulant. Keith mentioned UC Guyana. There were others, Andai, Benita Harris, and also the activists on the ground, people who drew people along with them. Ohini Kwamo is a very popular farmer and member of the ASCRIA. Takuma Gunse, the chair of this program, was closer to Walter than all of us here combined in many ways, which history will have to record at some point. But the energy that I think Rohit mentioned earlier of all of these people in an organization was one remarkable issue. And Keith mentioned another aspect which I constantly reiterate when I mentioned the issue of empathy in his eyes, that Walter always cared about people, whether it was in Jamaica, in the Dongles, when he was there in '68 and before, when he was in Tanzania, whether he made a sojourn to Cuba, whether he was in Zimbabwe, Trinidad and Tobago, in the United States, he always reached for the quote unquote the lowest possible denominator, the people. And it reminded me of what people said about Muhammad Ali, that instead of Muhammad Ali going in through the lobby of the hotel, he'd go through the kitchen and meet the ordinary people before going up to the top of the hotel. Well, Walter was like that, and all of the statements made by the comrades here today amplify that. I just want to make one more comment before I let the other speaker speak, that a U.S. academic named Robin Kelly put it very well when he said that Rodney was uniquely allergic to sectarian politics. And this goes back to Keith's point about Grenada you made earlier, and the other sectarian image, and Rohit's point about the other party, where you couldn't say contrary things. I've never seen that in the WPA throughout the time, whether or not there were differences and conflicts, as there were in all organizations. WPA had a unique ability to bring together non-ideological forces from all strands of society, multiracial, but also non-ideological, into one organization without having to emphasize it. There was a period when we emphasized political classes, but even then, we allowed a flexibility of thinking. And Roy could testify to that because he was one of the contrarians who argued for example, that the US Constitution be used instead of a Soviet-type constitution Guyana should use a US-type constitution rather than a Soviet-type constitution to bring the struggle forward. But I'll end here and come back to other points later on. Thank you.
Okay, Dennis.
Thank you. I think that the points that were made by both Rohit and Nigel had me thinking about some further reflections that I didn't prepare to share because those weren't on my notes. But Muhammad Ali, I think that Walter was profoundly influenced by Muhammad Ali. And the reason why I say this is because I don't know if you used to come, Nigel, when he actually read the Muhammad Ali's book to us. And he was such a warm and happy person. He would read and laugh and read with the diction and you know, as Muhammad, you know, Muhammad was a boastful chap. and so that was quite an experience listening to him, and he seemed to take some of that strategy. I think I actually wrote about it in an article about him that was published in a journal. I think he took some of that strategy and combined it with what Rohit was saying with the oratory to make points about the dictatorship in Guyana. And you could actually see some of the parallels in the way Muhammad Ali presented against his opponents and the way Walter did in at least some of the speeches that I've gone to listen to in Durban and Louisa Road, a favorite spot. Ogun, you know that very well. And so that was one. There's another personal kind of reflection. And then there's this other one about, well, that one was about him and sports. And I think what I did in the article I talk about the sports tactics being influential in political, in national politics or something like that. And the other thing was the debates. Those debates were and helped to form me and helped to inform me about the understanding Guyana and understanding the theoretical foundations on which the party is built. Because in those debates about how to create the WPA was Walter and Clive and Rupert and Morris Odell and Roberta Kilkenny and the whole set of folks used to be talking about what the party should be like and what the plan for the future should be like for the country. And so Walter had an important role in those debates. And I continue to use part of the debate on the peasantry, for example. That was a fundamental debate about whether Guyana has a peasantry and what should be the kind of agricultural policies towards the peasantry. And so there were two sides, that Guyana doesn't have a peasantry. Guyana has a kind of a semi-type peasantry. Some people work on the farm, and then at other times they work where they sell the labor power for wages. So it's not a pure peasantry. I remember that debate very well, and that debate continues to influence my own writing. So it's just a question of learning from these, from Walter, and from the early debates and the formation of WPA. Thanks.
Kit?
Since we're talking about Walter, I know they both Rohit and Nigel mentioned a few of our comrades, but at this point, I want to remember Ohini Kaoma. I knew Ohini pretty well, and I also want to mention Mobutu Karama. He was one of the best drummers I've ever heard. And I remember one day, one evening at the center when it was in Crowell Street, they had so both African and Tassa drumming. And Mobutu was playing that drum with such a passion that there were some women standing on the street out there on the grass listening, and they began to get moved by the drums. There was one young lady who fell down right there and began to go into spasms and convulsions. What we would say in Guyana in those days, she get the comfort, right there at the corner of the street on the grass outside of the center. So I want to acknowledge Mobutu as one of the best drummers I've ever heard.
His nickname was Drum.
Pete, you also have to acknowledge Osase, Abiomi Saito Osase.
Yes. If Osase was here.
Who was the who? Okay. I want to pose a question, even though I didn't intend to pose questions, but I think I want to pose a question. The party have survived about over 4 decades. And that is one of the remarkable things about the WP. We have achieved one of the first things any living organism or organization has to achieve. That is your survival. But then we have to give meaning to the survival. Everybody on the panel knew what was the WPA's vision for Guyana, our multiracial vision. Everybody on the panel will know what happened to the party and the country in the 1992 elections and subsequently. And I want to borrow on your presence to reflect objectively on those situations and to make possible recommendations that could be useful for the party and the country going forward. People can take it from any angle that they wish. but it would be a weakness on my part to have all these distinguished minds. I don't try to plug something out of it from, that we could use in the continuing effort to rebuild the party and to help the nation to achieve the objective of liberation and national and racial unity. Anybody could start.
I think that Keith was still on when you came in, Brother Ogun. So perhaps we should refer back to Keith to finish up what he was saying. And
Okay,
then
I'm sorry, Keith. I'm sorry. I thought you had concluded.
That's okay. Your question is very very pertinent. But I will just finish what I'm saying to give the brilliant minds enough time to formulate an answer to your profound question. But I was going to say that, Walter, for all his academic brilliance, for all his ability to ground with the poor and the oppressed, to walk in the shoes of Jesus, so to speak, in the Guyanese context, he was a person still in growth. You can tell from his speeches over the years that he spent in Guyana, from the first kind of conversations at Louisero and Durban Street. And my history teacher, Jamal Mohammed Sultan, from Wikanam, he told us to go and listen to Rodney. He was our teacher in fourth form. Prior to that, it was a guy named Mr. Clark, Malcolm Clark. Both of them are deceased. And Clark was like one of the Senegalese teachers that you spoke about. You go in there and you recite that Making of the West Indies or whatever it was. And, he would read it off without even looking at the book, and he would tell you, well, I'm now on page 20, or I'm now on chapter 4, and so on. And he has a book in his hand and closed, and he's reading. And when Jamal Muhammad came, it was like different. It was more an analysis of the history, and he spoke about Rodney until we knew him, and he said, "You all must go listen to him. He's going to be speaking, at Louisero and so on." And, we would go out there, those in the early days, the mid 70s, and hear him speak. But from those days to, I think until his last days on Merriman Mall, Rodney Mall, his attitude in terms of how he was relating to the issues that were becoming more dire and profound in Guyana was changing. There was a growth from an activist on the street to a teacher formulating a plan. And I remember at one speech, I think it may have been his penultimate speech, when he said, "Martyrdom is not my will," because he was moving as a teacher into a place where he felt that life and death had become significant. So he was a person in growth. And, of course, we can never tell what would have been the end product of that growth, because it was a snapshot by the PNC. but he was still growing as a revolutionary in Guyana.
I could build on that, what Keith just said there. I think that's profound. And I just give one anecdote to go to Ogun's question, Takuma's question, about the significance of Walter and the current situation. I think, and I mentions in her book, late and I mentioned in her book, The Point is to Change the World. She related an anecdote, which I think I was there the very day when it happened, but she recalled it better than I do. Two members were arguing about some aspect of Walter's book, one of the many books that he mentioned about. And so the two of them came to Walter to settle the debate. One had some view of the book, another one had another view. And they came to Walter, and Walter said to one of them, "Oh, I since changed my mind." So he had it on his head that Walter's statement in that text was permanent. But Walter said he changed. And that goes to Keith's point about development. I think that's one of the main issues that I think is important for any modern organization, to not hold on to mantra and work on the objective conditions at any particular point in time. Yes, you will have a...
Just hold a thought, Nigel. One of the brothers was you born Rockcliffe.
Yeah.
I know you heard me. I said one of the brothers
yes.
Rockcliffe.
Yes, Rockcliffe, right, exactly. Yes, you're quite correct. Rockcliffe is one and there's another one. Yeah, so Rockcliffe on this, and so when Walter changed, said that they were stunned. In other words, what Wright would say is cognitive dissonance. He couldn't believe it because Walter himself said he don't believe what he wrote. So that is one lesson. And the second lesson is the question that goes back to the whole issue of maximum leader. That Walter, even in spite of the fact of adoration of the masses, deliberately tried to push the collective leadership. Now, I know there are critiques then and now of what to do in a political space where leadership is the key thing. I mean, maximum leader. You have to put somebody in the lead of the list. How to deal with that? But generally speaking, the WPA has dealt with it fairly well, and I think perhaps that is one of the roots of what Takuma mentioned about the survival. Of course, a lot of debate about that. We could still think, but I would say that is one. And that has to do, I think, with the ability to take criticism. To take criticism on board and to change your mind. When I was in Senegal recently, there was a public debate. Well, the people who are leading the delegation, Senegalese, were suggesting that the founder of Senegal, Leopold Senghor, was no longer considered by the masses to be, quote unquote, a great independence leader. They had conflicted views about him. And one of the reasons is that Senghor, in spite of his negritude and in spite of his socialism, had a kind of affinity with France. And the modern youth do not like that affinity he had up to the time of his death. So there's a confliction about it. In the case of Guyana, the problem we have is the question of too little history, not too much. But at the same time, the fact that we don't reflect too much backwards, I think is a problem. In fact, paradoxically, is why we survive in a certain way, because they don't have to raise up the thing. So I would just leave those comments now, and then we could talk about it. But I think Walter's profound impact was his self-criticism, criticism of his own ideals, and as Keith said, constantly tuning up his assessment of society. And there's one last point. Walter himself said when he first came back again in 1974, he did not go out into the public and pronounce on everything. He consulted people on the ground, especially the working people, perhaps Takuma, certainly UC Guyana, certainly other elders in the community before he actually made a statement. And so that, I think, is a profound lesson for why forces like the WPA could survive for such a long time.
Right.
There's so many issues that are surfacing now, given the comments of everyone so far. But first of all, I would like to look at Guyana as a nation in evolution. When we look at American history, you have hundreds of years. When you look at British history, much longer period. But when we look at Guyana, we're seeing a nation with 50 odd years of nationhood. And Dennis mentioned classes and was referring to Epstein, a political scientist. They talk about interest groups. You have to live in America to understand the American politics of interest and interest groups and how corporations can dominate the societies. When you look at Guyana, what we have had at the moment of independence was really the vacating of a class, leaving a semi-vacuum where a new class had to come in place after independence. Now, Clive Thomas has written 3 phenomenal studies: Dependence and Transformation, the role of the authoritarian state in peripheral societies, and the poor and the powerless. But Clive made a fundamental statement in Dependence and Transformation. He said in the older societies, economic power gave rise to political power. The emergent class got economic power first and political power to consolidate it. He said in third world countries, what we get first is political power. And then we use political power to transform it into economic power. Now in Guyana, we have seen that process unfold on the 50 years. So it's really a nation in formation under a microscope. We can see it in its motion. And what we call corruption is really a process of class formation. That's how class formation takes place. In America, Standard Oil, all these places, they manipulated the system. They had the power. They violated the laws. It was corruption that built everything. We know Florida, it's openly acknowledged that drug money actually built Florida, at least so it is said. The politics of Guyana, as we speak, reflects the formation of classes. Nationalization was the only means, I would argue, where you would be able to transform state assets that were previously owned by private corporations into private pockets. We saw the process of privatization and deregulation sort of upset that process and give it a different twist where we are going to witness the consolidation of classes in Guyana through oil money. So the nation is in ferment. We are also seeing an influx of foreigners. You have Venezuelans, Brazilians enter into the country. The country will now become a magnet for foreigners because of the oil wealth. The reason I'm making this point is our politics will change profoundly. Our society will change profoundly. Guyana has more Guyanese living outside of Guyana than Guyanese living inside of Guyana. The Guyanese population is ridiculously small in relationship to the land resources we have. We cannot even secure our borders. So Guyana is faced with challenges the likes of which, if this nation does not come together, we are going to lose it in some form or another. The reason I am pointing to interest groups versus classes. In Guyana, the formation of classes is an ongoing process. And corruption, as I said, is a very important player in the formation of classes. So all the struggle we see with corruption and so is inevitable. That's how classes form and consolidate. What it does is makes it a very profound interest in ensuring the rule of law begins to assert itself in Guyana. We have to professionalize the state and make the state representative of all the peoples of Guyana. Now, I remember Walter at those public meetings. The one thing he demanded of the security forces and government employees was to behave as professionals. He always brought that message out. He said, behave as professionals. Do not allow yourself to be manipulated by the dictatorship. The struggles of that particular period is now confronting us. And everything that I've heard so far, Dennis, with his introduction of Walter's indigenization of politics to reflect the local development, Clive's work, even Walter's work, the history and evolution of the Guyanese working people. We have to now read, study, and understand our own history as seen through the eyes of the people who knows it best. Now, Walter's book on the Russian Revolution is such a profound book. And it was published, almost 30-something years after Walter's death. Yet Walter's had insight in that book that are so revealing. It tells us Walter was way ahead of the crowd in many things. And that book is a lot of evidence of how brilliant a mind Walter was. Thank you.
Okay, comrades, our closing time is 8 o'clock, so we're getting close. Kit, I will got to rob you a bit. You're a regular on this program. So what the remaining time we have may permit us to have closing remarks from the non-regulars. So let me start with you, Dennis.
Thanks, Ogun. And I must thank you very much for inviting me to be a part of this discussion. Now, as part of my closing remarks, I'll respond to the question that you posed, and I would like to congratulate you and the WPA, the very small numbers of you who are overworking in Guyana to keep this party at the forefront and keep people knowing about what we're doing. But in terms of the question that you posed, I think that the party can, and here am I going to be putting more work on you without being there myself to contribute in the kind of way that people should be contributing. I think we need to understand the different, as Rohit said, interest groups, even just the list of them, so we could then get a clearer understanding of who we could really work with, who you can form alliances with, the nature of the organizations that we're going to form alliances with in order to move forward. And we also got to do that, I think, in the context of electoral politics, because clearly we have to stay, I think, in that realm of electoral politics. And if you're staying in the realm of electoral politics, then you have to find ways to collaborate, because you can't, in a place like Guyana, it wouldn't be the only country where we're going to have coalition politics. That is the politics for Guyana. Now, in terms of Rohit's mention of Walter's book, the last book which I read, Nigel, familiar with the people who did that too. I think is an important work indeed, which we should all study. And also, I think there are lessons we can learn from that book and his other works on in terms of its application to ideas that we can apply to Guyana. But my key point, I think, that we really got to do in Guyana is understand what are the forces at play there now in order to form alliances. And in order to do that, I know that there was a time when people would have sessions and you would actually list the names of all the organizations, both international and national, and try to understand their platforms and then move forward like that. That's one small suggestion, if you're not already doing it.
Okay, Nigel, can you come in?
Yes, thank you very much, Dennis, and thank you. When I want to thank, like Dennis, I want to thank Takuma for inviting me, and also Kidaki, Amsterdam, and his Kams TV. It's a great pleasure to have a discussion with comrades, even on FaceTime on the internet, and discuss the old memories. My closing remarks have to do with the issue of what Rodney represents, and it dovetails off of Rohit's point about learning his work. He mentioned the history of the Russian Revolution, not so much because of the revolution, but because of the method in which Walter analyzed the Russian Revolution in present time. At that time, he wrote it. And I think that is what we need to do in that time. I know that some detractors of the party, when they hear the name Rodney, always dovetail towards or tend to attempt to co-opt Rodney from one specific plank. That is, using the period of his fight in the Burnham regime as a lightning rod to attack Rodney's living comrades. This strategic reflects, while correctly identifying Rodney's no-hold-bars fight against the authoritarian Burnham regime, holds a basic flaw. What did these convenient celebrants of Rodney restrict themselves to his fight against Burnham's authoritarian regime, but rarely took on his universal revolutionary record, his scholarship on Africa, his Black Power scholarship, his record on Black Power movement, or for that matter, they don't try to absorb some of the critical lessons of how to conduct multiracial struggle in places like Guyana. So I think any entry of Rodney's work into the Guyana sphere must take into account his wider work, not just that moment in time when he challenged. That is not a holistic sense of it, and Walter would probably blanch at the fact that people are just restricting him to one segment. As I said, he is always developing some kind of reflects about the current situation and context. And finally, everywhere I went, when I went to Senegal recently, when I mentioned the name Walter Rodney, the first reflex people said, not so much the book that Rohit mentioned, but How Europe Undeveloped Africa. Now, the book is not the alpha and omega of how Europe undeveloped Africa, and there are criticisms of some of its content. But that book remains for 40, 50 years, more than that, because it came out in 1972, the landmark book on how to understand modern capitalist developments in terms of a continent like Africa, but also applicable to the Caribbean, as Roy pointed out in his remarks, and how we have to understand the current context in Guyana of what he termed the disappearing Guyana. Walter would have been there making that analysis, but not only in the context of Guyana, but universalizing it. So I would like to end on that note, that Walter was not just a Guyanese historian, but a universal historian.
Okay, Rohit, could you give your final remarks?
Okay, I like to
we're
everyone
very
for
close to the hour.
okay. I'd like to thank everyone, I think, for an insightful presentation. But I want to give you some particular praise for the role you have played in the Guyana struggle from the 1960s to the present. And I also want to point out that we have had a very personal relationship. And it is that relationship that has allowed me to trust your instincts when it comes to Guyana politics. It is that trust I have in you personally that in the worst of times, I knew I could rely on you, your judgment, your political judgment, to bring the WPA through that period. I thank you very much for that.
Keith?
Yes,
even though it's a regular, you will have many goals, but tonight you guys give your closing remark in relationship to Walter.
I just want to say that thanks to Kadaki for facilitating us, although he's not in good spirit, in good strength from his endeavors over the weekend. Thank you for getting out of your comfort zone to facilitate the program. Thanks to viewers for tuning in and listening to us, and thanks to Ogun. I want to also thank Dennis, Nigel, and Rohit for being on the show. I mean, these three brothers are always very active in the work of the Working People's Alliance outside of Guyana, and as students of Walter, they understand very clearly, like I do, the importance of keeping the spirit of Walter alive, of teaching the youngsters who did not, as Rohit said, to many youngsters, he was Walter just a reader, somebody that they hear about and so on. We're in a position as people who touched and felt him, and as they said in the Gospels, we saw the wounds that put our hands, and since we're those people, we're in a better position to talk to the youngsters about what Walter stood for, about how Walter saw the working people in Guyana, and how he anticipated the growth of the political consciousness as a united people, multiracial, leading a democratic and free Guyana.
Okay, thanks to all the panelists for an excellent discussion on our beloved brother Walter Rodney, his life, his work, his struggle, and what he still means for us as a party and for the nation, the region, and the world. I want to say that this program is a new program by the party, and we hope to use the program and the technology that is made available to us through Brother Kadaki and Kams TV, and also on Dr. David Hinds' Politics 101, to bring other members, supporters of the party, who live outside Guyana, as well as those in Guyana, to access the program and to come and to participate and to discuss any aspect of national life, because we know we have a lot of resources outside the country. But before the COVID and the new reality, virtual reality, which make it possible, make it a common part of international life, we now could bring comrades who are thousands of miles away into the common space to discuss Walter, the party, and the nation. So I want to alert you, comrades, that we may be finding ways and means of bringing you back to discuss matters that are pertinent to the future of the country and the party. Once again, on the behalf of the Working People's Alliance and Kams TV, I welcome you panelists for your excellent job. I also want to welcome our faithful viewers who stuck with us even though we started a half hour late. And I'm sure that you have learned quite a lot about Walter, the WPA, the struggle, and Guyana. Thank you and good evening.
Can I ask one quick question? Kadaki, who is on the iPhone?
I'm on an iPhone.
Yeah, but I can see you. Yes. Yes, there's another iPhone there. Oh.
Hi, Kodaki. Have you started the iPhone intruder? Sorry. Okay, sorry.
Ring the bell, ring the bell. Ring the bell down there. Ring the bell, ring the bell. Ring the bell down there. Ring the bell for justice. Ring the bell down there. Ring the bell for culture.